You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
So, is Mythos the end game for cybersecurity?
Mythos is just the beginning.
Welcome to AI Security Brief, where we're unpacking emerging AI threats, vulnerability research, and the strategic decisions security leaders are making right now. I'm Johnny Hand.
And I'm Dustin Childs. And Johnny, we're on the road again. I just returned from Pondon, Berlin, where I saw a lot of exploitation that was really facilitated by artificial intelligence and different AI models. While at the same time, you had a chance to talk to Bair from Anthropic and all things Mythos. So I'd love to hear more about your conversation with him.
Yeah, it was honestly a great conversation, and Rob really is the perfect person for this. As the head of national security partnerships at Anthropic, he's had a storied career throughout the military, and one that is kind of a fun fact, actually circled my military career where we both worked in cybersecurity in the U.S. government. So we dug into Mythos, we dug into nation-state activity. It was very, very fun, very interesting, and I'm excited to jump right in.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about it, especially because there's so much hype around Mythos, but I really want to get into beyond the hype and why it matters, and especially since the nation-state angle is a real and current threat and not theoretical in the least. We've already seen this happening in the wild.
Great. Let's dive in. Rob, one of the things I've been really excited to chat with you about is the fact that we both came through the Navy. We both have similar career paths. And we've been in and around each other for probably the last 20, 25 years. So tell me a little bit about your Navy career, how you got started, and then how that transcended into where you're working today.
Yeah, I mean, I think I accidentally ended up in cybersecurity. So just like your son, Keegan, I was a nuclear power trained officer, spent my first 5 years on submarines, and then had a medical issue that wouldn't let me continue in submarine force. And it turns out 2008 was not a great time to get out of the Navy and go get a job on Wall Street. So I ended up staying in the Navy and redesignating into a cyber-related field, and then went and worked on very early cyber capabilities at a special operations command, and then went to NSA and US Cyber Command and kind of like stayed on the leading edge of integrating technology into operations. Yep. And so just led to a really awesome career. And I think like the background in nuclear power, just understanding, how a nuclear reactor works, it's just understanding how electrons flow. It's a very like natural transition into cyber. So, we overlapped in with many of our shipmates. And so it was a great transition into cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's really neat because we were in and around each other like pretty much most of our career and never actually met, which was kind of funny. And I think I was joking with a friend the other day that the older you get, the smaller the world gets, and you realize that you know a lot more people than you realize. So one thing I want to hit on a little bit with your Navy career, because we both came from an operations background, and I think that's something that's missed. A lot of times we think like cybersecurity is this high technical space, but ultimately, like with U.S. Cyber Command, I was at Navy Cyber Defense Operations Command, kind of the forefront of what became U.S. 10th Fleet and then into U.S. Cyber Command. And one of the best skills was translating into operations, because a lot of folks didn't have that. So did your Navy career in terms of your being an officer on the nuclear side, but then moving in, did that help you kind of make sense of the cyber world?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it is all about operations. It's about translating the technology into some sort of business outcome. And, the Navy, we don't have profit and loss, but we have mission outcomes that, you saw when you were working with the Navy SEALs. And I think it's just a really natural transition to get into that space. And I think the other thing that it made me realize is like, we can always have the best technology. In the DoD or DOW, we got to spend a lot of money on toys and tech. But at the end of the day, it was about the people deploying the tools and tech. And so like I was really blessed throughout my career to have some really incredible people building out a security operations center or whatever it was. And we made tooling decisions and technology decisions, but like what we really emphasized was investing in our people. And I think the same is true in an AI powered world where we are today.
I really love that because we often get really excited about the technology. And I've said for years, it's like you can buy the best technology, you can have all the capabilities, but at the end of the day, if someone doesn't do the right thing, you're still left with the same result. So switching gears a little bit, you're in the national security space, focused with Anthropic, very exciting space to be. What are you seeing in terms of trends with enterprise companies that they're missing around AI, especially around the national security conversation?
Yeah, I'm not sure about how broad the understanding is about how fast things are moving in the AI-enabled cyber world right now. In late September of last year, Anthropic published what we called publicly GTG 1002,
Yep.
which was a Chinese nation-state actor utilizing Claude to do a fully autonomous cyber kill chain against both public and private sector organizations. And I think maybe even internally and as a community, we were caught off guard by how quickly we went from script kiddies to folks using AI to write functional ransomware. And then all of a sudden we were watching a nation state pop relatively mature or very mature cyber organizations fully autonomously. And I think we're just seeing the beginning of that trend now, and that's just going to continue. And so, our partnership is so important because now we're fighting, a nation state with using AI with defensive AI.
Yeah, that's a good point because I think when we talk to a lot of organizations, they're excited about the potential of AI, but we also know that we have to defend at the speed of machine, right? And that's a big change. Are you seeing cyber criminals, other nation state organizations that are trying to leverage, the technology that you're partnered with Anthropic in other ways?
Yeah, of course. I mean, so you'll see just, a fully autonomous kill chain that a nation state has the ability to do, like, some mature organization with very experienced operators. But we're also seeing, ransomware actors with, previously no ability to code. They don't know how the code functions. They don't know how it works, but somehow they're able to sell fully functional ransomware on the dark web. And when the ransomware breaks, they're asking, AI, how do I fix this tool? And so I think we'll just continue to see this proliferation as, as a service threats.
Yes.
And so, we have ransomware as a service. Now are we going to have, tooling as a service, what it looks like from a nation state perspective. And so I think, again, figuring out what the telemetry looks like. You have 3 decades of telemetry. You're doing bug bounty programs, finding 0 days. I think figuring out how we integrate AI into the defensive operations is the only way that we're going to stop future criminals and nation states.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about the partnership is between Trend AI and Anthropic is that we're focused on tackling the most challenging things together. And there's always the conversation of whenever you look at what adversaries are doing, what the threat is, how you tackle that. I think we have this idea that AI is this easy button, but ultimately you still need the skills of the defender, right? And I think what you're saying is that we actually upskill people with the technology versus just trusting the system.
Yeah, I mean, we're a frontier model company. Anthropic is going to continue to develop the best models and attempt to get to AGI first, and we're going to provide you those advanced models for you to integrate into operations. And you have a large R&D staff, a large cybersecurity staff that can take those frontier models. And to your point earlier about the Navy and operationalizing things, you're operationalizing them on decades of experience and then deploying them into enterprises, which, as a frontier company, that's not our focus today. And so our partnership is so important to reduce the attack surface and really block threats out in the wild.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we were talking about operationalizing. So when you're dealing with large enterprises, especially that are focused on Fed and Gov spaces, what is the message that you're taking to them, and where are they at in their maturity? How are they responding to AI threats, but also the AI innovation?
Yeah, I mean, having spent over 2 decades in government and working in the executive branch and in the military, I think you and I recognize that the government doesn't move as quickly as we need it to move, right? And so, I was a part of the small team that wrote Executive Order 14028, which was improving the nation's cybersecurity after, a series of events, which was, Colonial Pipeline, JBS Foods, SolarWinds. And I think at the time, in around 2020, 2021, we thought that SolarWinds was going to be this like once in an administration opportunity to get this executive order out and approved, and the hits just kept on coming.
Yeah.
And still, as a federal government, I don't think we moved as quickly as we needed to move. That is pre-AI.
Yeah.
Right now we're in this AI-enabled era, and I think the federal government and large enterprises are working to figure out like how do we move quickly to keep up with this pace. And there are a lot of promising signs, on the horizon that the U.S. government is going to adopt things quickly, but it just takes time.
Yeah. I always try to temper and understand like what's the appetite for change. Because if there's a good appetite, then you can actually enact really good, policy and start moving that ball along. But you're right. I think that was one of my experiences as well. Was the idea that we know we need to move fast, but it's a big ship. It's hard to move it quickly. So that's always a big challenge. And so kind of jumping into that conversation around the risks and the movement of the government in general and those things, let's pivot a little bit to the excitement and also the anxiety around Mythos and this model that was released and the partnerships around that. Can you give us a little bit about what Mythos is and maybe what it isn't that people are missing?
Yeah, I mean, look, Mythos is just the beginning when it comes to more cyber capable models.
Yep.
As a consequence of models being really good at coding and really good at software engineering, those are the same types of analytical skill sets that you need when you want to do cyber operations, right? And so to identify vulnerabilities and then identify exploits or chain together exploits to move forward in the kill chain process, I think we as Frontier Labs will continue to see those capabilities increase. And so, Mythos for us, we did not make the model generally available because we saw how skilled it was as a cyber operator and a vulnerability discovery engine. So we wanted to release that model in a way that was responsible, and we had safeguards built in. And so we looked across companies who had the ability to reduce the attack surface and had critical software that affected, the most Americans to make their cybersecurity lives safer.
Yeah.
And so, as other Frontier Labs and ourselves, we continue to develop more capable models in the cyber domain. I think the important thing is we developed the Responsible Scaling Program, RSP, which is all about safety in models. And so we're going to need to make sure that we have safety and safeguards to identify incidents like GTG 1002, like we talked about earlier, and block those before they become a thing.
Yeah, you hit on a couple really interesting pieces. One is the discovery conversation. And I think what everyone gets really excited about or even anxious around, the Mythos conversation or these foundational, tools is that, there's an onslaught of discovery that's coming. And, it's interesting because when we talk about it, there's core tenets to a security program. And as good as discovery is, we want to find those things early. That's part of the partnership that you're doing with Mythos is early discovery and notification. We've operated ZDI for over 20 years, and one of the things that we found is, there's a large gap between discovery and actually remediating. And I think that's the message, right? Is like, hey, we're going to get really good, and we're going to see more and more discovery, but now we have to learn how to close the gap. Are you having those conversations around Mythos with in the national security space around the later part, which is not just the discovery, but the actual remediation?
Yeah, that's a great point. And when you and I were in uniform, I think patching was always the bane of our existence, right? Where you were tracking it on an Excel spreadsheet. But the vulnerabilities came at a pace which were unmanageable even at that time, right? We couldn't patch fast enough. And now we're in this space where we're going to see probably tens of thousands of vulnerabilities in software. We found bugs in software dating back, like almost 30 years, 27 years, 15 years, that pen testers and vulnerability researchers have been looking at forever, and they haven't found these bugs. Now we're finding them. We're finding them at a speed that's unprecedented. And to your point, I think the difficult thing is now getting those vulnerabilities discovered, but then developing a patch for it, and then really getting that patch deployed to the end user. And so that's always been a bottleneck, and now we've even increased that bottleneck by finding vulnerabilities at a speed which we haven't seen in the past.
Yeah, there's an oncoming flood of discovery, right? But you hit on something earlier around responsible, right? You had to talk about the responsible program. Can you expound a little bit on that and what that means for enterprises and especially in the federal space?
Yeah, I mean, look, responsible disclosure, like we're working closely with, partners and vendors in the program. And we've also made generally available Cloud Security, which allows companies to quickly scan code bases that are proprietary and find vulnerabilities in those and patch them. So, we're an enabler of vendors and security providers to then go and help them fix, vulnerabilities in their critical software. And so, we want to work with vendors as closely as possible to say, like, we'll give you the capability. You have to go and scan your software, fix those vulnerabilities, and then, work with whether it's the federal government or the private sector to go and get those patches into the hands of the end user, which again is the most difficult thing.
Yeah, that's the life cycle that I think we don't often talk about, and I think anyone that's been in cybersecurity for years, especially with the speed and pace of AI, is like, I love the discovery pace. I want to understand, as early as possible what bugs are out there and is there, an attack path. But then we have to get to the real work, and the real work is the hardest part, which is like, can we patch these? Can we move in an environment and move to our production, get these applied, and work on that? So the responsible disclosure is important. It's a good conversation, and then that allows the security operators to actually look at their environment, contextualize it, and say, okay, right now I have to do something about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think years ago when we were in uniform, we talked about defense in depth. Like that was like the whole thing in the Navy, it was defense in depth. And I think, that being brilliant at the basics, one, which is, figuring out how you patch, still very, very important when it comes to preventing exploitation on your networks. And two, it's having partners like Trend AI and having the ability to either block proactively threats or detect things that are 0 days, like your research and development teams are doing today. Like that still holds true today.
Yeah, I love that statement of being brilliant, right, at the basics, because I think sometimes we feel like I normally catalog most of what we do into the three categories of like people, processes, and technology, and we often think that there's going to be a technology that's just going to fix things, right? And so in this case, we're talking about Mythos, and the discovery factor is exponentially increased, but we still have to get to the basics. We still have to be able to patch and remediate, and being really, really good at the simple things, the core foundational items, are really what sets you apart. From a security practitioner, maybe for security listener or leaders that are listening to this podcast, could you provide like one or two, key takeaways, if you will, around Mythos, and like how do you shore up and firm up your programs?
Yeah, look, again, like I said, Mythos is just the beginning. I think figuring out how you integrate frontier models into your security program is extremely important, whether that's for vulnerability research or figuring out how you use agents to help you patch in a very efficient way. I think that's really important. I think understanding the speed at which things are happening, right? Like we saw a step change function from Opus 4.6 to Mythos Preview in its ability to do cyber-related tasks. And you see other frontier labs releasing models that are also step-changing capable. So I think just understanding the speed and where we're going to be potentially at the end of 2026, end of 2027 with AI-enabled tools, you need to start that integration now. And if you're not moving at the speed of AI and you haven't integrated into your SOCs yet, a company that's rebranded to Trend AI after 3 decades in operation, that's pretty telling to me, like where this field is going.
All right, so Rob, as we wrap up today, we normally ask our guests: is there one key takeaway or maybe one thing that we didn't cover that you'd like to highlight and talk about?
Yeah, I think Mythos Preview has been the topic of conversation since April 7th when we released it publicly. I think what we're missing in that conversation is actually integrating other frontier models into your security posture, right? And so we released Cloud Security that I mentioned earlier. So figuring out how you're going to operate in the world of AI with non-Mythos models is extremely important, right? And so we're making those models generally available so security practitioners can figure out how they're going to integrate into their workflows. And we would love to see that proliferate even more than it is today.
Yeah, there's an opportunity to use, the bevy of tools to really level yourself up as a practitioner.
Well, Johnny, that was a really great discussion, and I really appreciated the part about the GTG 1002 disclosure. I mean, where you have a nation state running a fully autonomous kill chain using a frontier AI model. And that, to me, goes beyond just another threat report, and it's really a meaningful line being crossed.
Yeah, and it's a differentiated message with Mythos as well. And Rob actually hit it right on the head. He said, this isn't the end of cybersecurity. This is actually the ground floor. And that really, really reinforces what's always been true. And we have to understand that while discovery is getting faster, we still have to see discovery through remediation. And that's something that our Trend AI zero-day initiative team has been doing for over 20 years.
Yeah, and just like we saw at Podun Berlin, I mean, AI-enabled offense is certainly here and it's going to stay, but it really just requires AI-enabled defense at scale to counteract that. That's one of the reasons that Trend AI has partnered with Anthropic to understand these frontier models and to make sure that they meet operational deployment.
Yep. And a key takeaway for our listeners, if you haven't started integrating AI into your security operations centers or your security workflows, you have to start now. So I'd like to thank Rob Bair for such a great conversation. If you'd like to learn more about Rob and his work with Anthropic, or how to access additional resources related to our partnership, please see the show notes for those.
Yeah, we also linked to an on-demand webinar Johnny and I delivered on how Mythos raises the stakes for cybersecurity, plus links to nation-state and AI-related threat research. So go check those out.
And that does it for another episode of AI Security Brief. We want to thank you for joining us. Our goal is to host conversations that have you thinking differently about security. And if it does, consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next.
AI Security Brief is mixed and produced by Elliot Peltzman with original music by Omnia Jinx. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben, with content strategy by Mayan Plout and Melanie Gallant. Additional production help by Liz Stokes, video editing by Sorel Joppi and Bridget Creaky Wild.
Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on AI Security Brief.